Also, welcome to the Select Board's meeting for Monday, May 17th, 2021. We have an agenda which will start with our coronavirus community update from Chief Cassidy. And good evening, Chief. As we look up, I think we might see a little light at the end of some tunnel.
There is light.
News to report.
Lots of news to report. First of all, something I haven't been able to report for a long time, but there have been no new cases that have come onto our caseload since last Monday.
Good news.
That is definitely a nice milestone that we haven't seen for a very long time. Last Tuesday, we cleared...
Quick footnote, we are doing contact tracing from town meeting, correct?
That is correct.
As we have for the last
But since I haven't had any new cases in the last week, there's no one whose address I need to compare.
Just want to throw that out there.
But the town clerk has given me a list of registered voters who checked in at town meeting. So last Tuesday, we did clear 25 additional cases. We're down to 14 active cases, which are spread out over 10 unique addresses. There are 7 single cases and then 3 clusters, both of those at single-family homes. So looking at our graph, sort of plateauing off there towards the end, which is a good way for it to be. Looking at our positivity rate, we continue to be a little bit higher than the Commonwealth, but we've got a solid 16 weeks of yellow, which is good. Without jinxing us, I'm not a betting man, but it's my hope that within the next couple of weeks we may see a color change in Holliston. That we may finally be out of the yellow. I'm not going to tell you exactly what color that could be.
Well, it's spring, so maybe that's a hint.
How quickly it could come, but when you look at some of the communities around us, if you look at the map, Framingham, Holliston, Hopkinton, Milford are all yellow. Ashland, Sherburne, and Millis, as of last week, were in the gray, and Medway had achieved green status. So as of last Thursday, there were only 6 communities in the Commonwealth that were in the red high-risk category. Looking at our vaccination numbers, we are now over 50% fully vaccinated in Holliston. Again, we've got lots to celebrate this evening. 53.4% of our population, as determined by the DPH, is considered to be fully vaccinated. 71% are at least partially vaccinated, including everybody over 65, which includes, obviously, the over 75 as well. And if you look at our regional collaborative, they are now also offering the Pfizer vaccine for individuals 12 to 15. They had already started with the 16 and 17-year-olds on the previous Saturday, but they now, once the EUA was issued by the CDC for individuals 12 to 15, they do still have appointments for 12 to 15-year-olds this Wednesday from 2:30 to 5:30, this Thursday from 2:30 to 5:30, and this Friday from 2:30 to 5:30. So obviously they've scheduled those appointments for 12 to 15-year-olds after school so that parents who wish can try and make an appointment there in Northborough. Well, it's the Westboro Doubletree, but the link there shows that it's the Northborough. They're the coordinating health department. And then, big inhale, exhale, let's talk about reopening. Lots of news today. The governor has announced that they are moving up the reopening of all sectors of the Commonwealth as of May 29th. Most industry-specific standards and capacity limits will be lifted on May 29th. The face covering order will be rescinded on May 29th, at which point there will be DPH guidance to go with the CDC guidelines for both outdoor spaces as well as what those who are vaccinated should and shouldn't do, and what those who are unvaccinated should or shouldn't do. There will be some sectors where masking, regardless of one's vaccination status, will still be required. Public and private transportation hubs, inside K through 12 schools, inside child care programs, healthcare facilities, including nursing homes and behavioral health, 24/7 congregate care settings, healthcare and rehab facilities, and all of this has been driven by the Medical Advisory Board, which has been meeting for well over a year and has been moving to reopen all sectors of our society. And then the governor also announced that on the 15th of June, he would be ending the state of emergency, which he enacted for the Commonwealth back in March. Also, prior to the May 29 face covering order change, there are changes to the mask order for under 18 involved in recreation and involved in recess and outdoor instruction at K-12 schools effective tomorrow. But the adults would still need to have the masks in those settings between the 18th and the 29th. So with that, I'll pause. I know that's a lot to absorb. See if there are any overall general questions that you might have.
Yeah. I might have a couple.
Excellent.
My first question is when you talk about the numbers of fully vaccinated, the 52.4%,
Yes.
is that after the 2-week waiting period? Is that counted as someone who's fully vaccinated, or is it as soon as you get that second shot?
It's as soon as they have received the shot, because the way the vaccination sites are required to report to MIIS, it's entered before they leave the vaccination site. So their numbers are shots in arms, not the CDC definition of fully vaccinated, which is 2 weeks post-series. So if they're Moderna or Pfizer, it's 2 weeks after the second shot. If it's Johnson & Johnson, it's 2 weeks after the single dose.
Because I'm getting my second Moderna tomorrow, so that would mean that I would be considered fully vaccinated to have it.
You will become a statistic tomorrow.
I'm a statistic today, but I'll be a statistic.
You will have additional benefits in 2 weeks.
Okay. I'll pivot to the executive order for the state of emergency of the governor.
Yes.
So, forgive me because a lot of this happened before my moment on the board, so I don't necessarily know some of those specifics. I'm just going to ask a little bit that might be a little basic here.
Sure.
But as I understand it, Holliston is under a state of emergency as well. We've declared our own, correct?
Correct.
So we would be sort of within our, I'm not saying we do anything, but I'm just saying we may need to look at some of those kinds of rules and things like that in the coming weeks about what's there and what we can do or send it and such.
Correct. So there are 2 states of emergency in effect directly impacting Holliston right now. There's the gubernatorial state of emergency, which is what allowed Governor Baker to issue multiple emergency orders, including all of the mask orders and the sector-specific guidance, gathering limits, and there have been well in excess of 60 of those that have been issued in the last year.
Yes.
So he invoked his authority as governor based on the public health emergency, and he was making decisions for the Commonwealth.
Right.
When I went to the board last March and asked them to declare a local state of emergency, that was also for the same emergency incident, but that was to facilitate a local coordination of the response to the public health emergency. So at the state level, by declaring a gubernatorial state of emergency, the governor was able to put his lieutenant governor in charge of the reopening committee. He was able to put certain secretariats and task people to the COVID-19 command center and move their day-to-day operations and put them in more of a coordination role. In the same way, the board empowered me as emergency management director to coordinate the community's response.
Sure.
That didn't undermine any individual department's authority. Board of Health still had sweeping powers. The select board still had their authority. Police department was still, enforcing, laws and regulations and local bylaws. But it allowed a single point of contact to coordinate our community's response to the public health emergency. So, with the governor rescinding his state of emergency on June 15th, we also will need to evaluate in that same time frame, have we gotten to the point in Holliston where the conditions that we are facing are such that we are comfortable rescinding the state of emergency? Now, that doesn't mean that all the effects are over. And the example that I often use when I teach emergency management is the recovery phase will continue for years, like with Katrina. The physical damage was done, but the emotional damage and the rebuilding takes decades. In the same way, although we may reach statistical herd immunity, although we will have majority of the sectors of our community will have reopened and things will have gotten back to what looks like pre-pandemic. Our parades will look like they used to. Our agricultural festivals will look like they used to. There still may be some modifications in the schools, but for the most part, our community will look a lot like it did in 2019. But there will still be impacts to businesses. There will still be families who are struggling. There will still be food insecurity. So with the assistance of the ARPA funds, we as a community will still have the ability to address real needs in our community using the tools available to us. And so we will have to identify how it is that we address recovery, but it doesn't have to be under a state of emergency. So I can still apply for FEMA reimbursement for expenses that were incurred. If the board so chooses, I can still help screen requests for CARES money through the end of the calendar year. And that will all be based on, we'll need to, I think the term that I heard earlier was decouple. We'll need to figure out, once we go back to normal operating, you know, we've got certain systems in place, certain flow charts that say if you're a department or an individual who wants to access CARES funds, this is the process by which you make the request. It's vetted by the chief brings it to the board. The board approves the money while they still have a balance. Right. That can continue even if the state of emergency has ended locally.
Okay. And my last question is sort of some of the language in the executive orders also pertain to how we can, as a community, can use technology.
Yes.
And I know, I'm sure there's a lot of residents who become accustomed to being able to participate. I mean, we certainly can think that we can quickly come up with some opportunities where if we had meetings in this room, for example, we would not have been able to have the number of people that were able to participate. And one of my concerns, I know the legislature is going to take up some potential, you know, stopgap efforts, if you will, but one of my concerns is if things abruptly end and things go back to business as usual, residents might feel left out.
Disenfranchised?
And I think, well, yes, disenfranchised as well. So I think we need to understand what that means, and if this board needs to take action with respect to things like technology, we need to know about that sooner better than later so that residents can see a seamless impact. And so I would certainly call on my colleagues to consider that as we go forward.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Earlier today, you received an email from Council Talman's office. Senior did as well.
Yep.
The governor's order is clearly having an impact, or will have an impact on a lot of the normalcy that we've experienced during COVID that a lot of us have come to value. And the question is, will they continue in any way beyond June 15th? So to your point, Ben, I think that won't be resolved tonight. There will be a...
No, but I want to make sure it's on our radar that we can...
No question. I talked to the town clerk earlier today about that very issue, about how we can continue open meetings, remote meetings. The current law might have more restrictions, or it was clearly not envisioned to be a all-use and all-in solution that we've enjoyed. So I suspect then over the next several weeks, the administration, the legislators that make the laws will recognize the benefit, I think, of continuing. And that's one example.
You know, and I just want to make sure that we keep it on our radar, so if there are any gaps, that we're making sure that we're addressing them as quickly as possible.
I think if I recall correctly, with your former board, that was one of the ones that was making an appeal for remote meeting.
Sure.
And one of the hurdles at the time was the lack of technological infrastructure. It was a cost.
Yeah.
Well, we've now achieved that investment, and it's time to
and that's certainly not
harness that going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I know, I think in the past, I think this board had to take a particular vote to that effect.
Yep.
So that way, I just want to make sure if that has to be the case, that we are able to do that.
So according to Liz, and again, this is all preliminary phone call, that vote under that law has sort of a conditional appeal to it. You may conduct your meetings using remote technology while these circumstances exist, type of thing.
Quorum would have to be present.
Right.
Number of those.
It was different.
Right.
So I think reasonable people would agree that that particular law needs to grow up and reflect what we've been, seeing. Almost enjoying this.
And it was really intended to allow the government body to continue to operate even if a member were out of town on business or had a childcare issue and therefore couldn't physically come to the meeting. It didn't really speak to the participation of the public.
Right.
And that's where we have really seen the remote participation option. Absolutely. So I agree, it needs a legislative fix.
Yes.
Because the pre-health emergency legislation that would have required a vote of the board to approve remote participation for boards and committees was very, very limiting. And again, in the next month, the folks on Beacon Hill are going to have to try and address this in a comprehensive.
And I'm sure they will. I want to make sure that we're thinking about it, because so if we can have it on agenda, if we need to do anything.
And that's where I wanted to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
In time, not tonight, of course, but in time, I think it's important for the board to make a decision as to which way we're leaning in terms of that participation from the public. Is it something that we want to continue to embrace? I think what's going to end up coming by way of legislation is going to become sort of a hybrid model, where you're doing both.
The board has to be in public, but so see if there's other things.
Some form. That is what I'm hearing from all the Metro West communities when they're talking about remote participation in hearing candidates. But I think it would be important for this board to sort of come to maybe some kind of a consensus on how we want to, if we want to continue to embrace the level of public engagement that we've seen, and then what steps do we need to take by way of adoption of legislation or by way of policy?
Or even for support. Is there any other financial investment that needs to take place?
And there really was a very active role of this board early on in the public health emergency, where you directed boards and committees, nobody's going to be in the building. If you have to meet because it's urgent and it's related to dealing with the public health emergency, you can use the technology to meet. Now, as months have gone on, boards and committees need to get back to their normal business, and their meeting was their normal business. So we need to figure out under what conditions, and again, that comes back to, as Ms. Hine said, the policy in terms of, and obviously, I already had conversations with the technology director earlier today, because this is very much on his mind, because a super amount of his time has been spent in the last year coordinating all of these meetings, and just as I sat down, we talked about it at the end of the tunnel, but if this is going to be the new normal, then there's no light for him.
Right.
The workload just continues. So does he need to change the way his department is organized to accommodate for that?
Absolutely. Okay, that's all the questions.
Chris, that's exactly what my husband said to me at dinner tonight. He's like, how does your IT director feel about all this? Oh, no, we'll find out.
Go ahead, Jean.
A couple things. Real practical first. Memorial Day is obviously the day or two after the May 29th deadline set by the governor. Is there any communication that we need to get to those organizing the parade?
So the original guidance that was sent out by the organizers of the parade was, we're going to have it, and the mask order that will be in effect at the time is, if you're going to participate and you can't maintain social distancing, then you need to wear approved face coverings. The sector-specific guidance is being lifted, including festivals and parades, and so I hope to get more guidance tomorrow from a DPH conference call. I've already sent up a question about graduation ceremonies,
Right.
because they had sector-specific guidance that was very, very detailed and regimented, and their event comes in June, so it would be after May 29, but does their sector-specific guidance that was previously issued by DESE still stand? And the response I got from the state was, I don't know. I'll put that on the list for tomorrow's Q&A during the conference call. So I suspect that things like, what does Memorial Day look like? I'll probably have more guidance in the next 48 hours.
So the practical piece, because what caught my mind was the gathering when the senior attended on May 29th. And so my question really was about the permit that we signed. I'm trying to find it. I can't. I don't think there was a limit to the size of the parade. That was really what I was.
That and Chief Stone was very good about using
more generically
a copy-paste line that indicated that the organizers must comply with all public health regulations in effect at the time of the event.
And the chair of the House, the Memorial Day Committee, Steve Bradford, has already had a meeting with both chiefs and will maintain excellent communication, so I don't think it'll be an issue if anything needs to be communicated.
Then the only other form of communication that caught my attention was the farmer's market with Bobby Blair, who happens to be on the call. It looks like, just in terms of, again, gathering sizes being rescinded and whatever implications that may have on the farmer's market, that seems important to communicate out if he didn't already know, which I'm sure he does, but those are the two things that caught my attention. Couple more practical steps. Board of Health next step.
So,
what should we be paying attention to with the Board of Health?
So, just like we have a gubernatorial state of emergency and we have a Holliston local state of emergency, the Board of Health, at my suggestion last spring, had enacted their own mask order, and then we had the state emergency orders that have gone through several iterations. Right now, Holliston's mask order is more stringent than the state regulations. So I have asked that the Board of Health would address that at their meeting tomorrow night.
Okay.
My recommendation, especially in light of what's happening on May 29th, not limited by what happened on April 30th, is that the board rescind its mask order that was voted last spring, and that they just indicate that in Holliston we will comply with mass DPH and CDC guidelines.
Thank you.
So that's what you should be looking for is tomorrow night. It should be a very quick and simple vote because we don't have local conditions that would warrant us continuing to be more stringent than state or CDC guidelines.
Okay. And then with the schools, it sounds like you already, obviously, communication, but senior activities, prom, graduation, stuff.
Yes.
So enough of that, it's all on you.
The term that I used with a colleague today was that it's like trying to staple Jell-O to the wall. Or
just remember, if prom does go forward, these kids haven't had a party in over a year.
a legal party.
Are you good? All right, Chief. Two items for you. To Mr. Sparrow's point earlier about our current state of emergencies, please plan to report back to the board in the coming weeks on the particular pieces that need to be decoupled. I frankly could not remember the particulars of that order. It was a while ago, but I think we want to do so in the planned effect that releases the community and you from certain duties. And we were talking before we went on air, Mike, about the fact that despite not being within a state of emergency, your role as emergency management director doesn't sunset. In fact, it will continue as we navigate the world, handling the remaining months available on CARES funding as well as ARPA. If you wanted to just briefly address that portion of going forward doesn't change.
Correct. Yeah, those, and this would not be my first FEMA reimbursement. I've done more than 12 in my career, and so this is a normal extension of the role as an emergency manager.
And regarding the governor's order overall, there are various stages to what was released today. Is that information on the town's website? I know people will probably go wherever they can find it, but make it easy to put on the town's website for all the other COVID.
Some has been posted to social media. I was waiting for the PDF orders to come through. As soon as I have final versions of state guidelines, those will actually go up on the town website.
Thanks, Chief. Let's go to the Zoom real quick and ask if anybody on the Zoom call this evening has questions for you relative to the coronavirus community update. Hearing none, let us move on, Chief, to the CARES Act and ARPA information update.
Okay, so even though it's been 2 weeks since I came before you last in this format, I don't have any requests for you, but I can tell you that in the last 2 weeks, 16 additional expenses have been posted to Munis in the aggregate of approximately $20,000, and although that may seem like a lot for 2 weeks, that included over $11,000 for the water bottle filling stations at Town Hall and the PD, 1 month of municipal cleanings at multiple buildings, some supplies for grocery and meals delivery, and then our ongoing additional part-time hires to facilitate the response. And then looking at the graph, the next quarterly report for the CARES expenses that were incurred for the period of January to March is due to Administration Finance on June 4. So I'll be working with the town accountant to make sure that all of our records comply with what she needs and with what the auditors will need, as well as what A&F will need. Moving on to ARPA. So just a reminder, these are the eligible uses for ARPA funds. And I do know that the town administrator signed up for another MMA webinar this Thursday to discuss ARPA.
Word on the street is he was the 1001.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he was he was in the waiting room last week. But
White House needs to increase their Zoom account.
yeah, I'd be happy to allow our
federal funds available to folks to do that.
I'm confident that our technology director could do some consulting if they were interested. So the interim final rule was adopted by Treasury on May 10th. While we were in the final stages of setting up for and enacting our first night of town meeting, the U.S. Treasury Department issued 134 pages of guidance, which I am still dissecting. But again, these are the major categories: supporting public health expenditures, addressing negative economic impacts that are caused by the public health emergency, replacing lost public sector revenue, providing premium pay for essential workers, and investing in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Of the 134 pages, I do want to make sure to point out that there are ineligible uses. Changes that reduce net tax revenue must not be offset with ARPA funds. Extraordinary payments into a pension fund are a prohibited use explicitly of this funding. And then there are also some other restrictions that apply. But we are dissecting those interim final rule, and now that we finally have the final rule, we can draw together the stakeholders that we had talked about a few weeks ago, talk about what it is that we as a community see as a priority for areas where we believe that these funds should be spent. And if you would like, I can draw up a similar flowchart as we had for CARES, which basically funnels requests through a screening process and then brings them to the board if you'd like.
We're jumping into, you're directing the question this way, but I think the board has probably a collective answer to your question. Just keep in mind real quick, I spoke earlier this evening with Travis about ARPA funds. Unlike CARES money, which a year ago we couldn't wait to get our hands on, we had all these expenses looming, we had to get after it. We set up this apparatus which has worked pretty well, I might say, through you. My sense is, and again, it'll be a board decision, is to step back for ARPA, form a group of stakeholders, as you said, Mike, that include yourself, DPW, Youth and Family, the Long-Range Planning Committee people, and have a look at what can we do with the breadth of these funds under those purpose areas, and then strategically start working towards project management effectively, rather than waiting, as we did under CARES, for the project effects to come to you. Because I do believe there's a mix here of both macro projects and the micros that we know will come in as they did under COVID. So I would recommend that the town administrator take the lead to this board, of course, and form this group without delay to begin formulating a scope of work that can guide how we will generate projects that will follow the similar path that we've seen to date. Did you want to add anything to that, Ben?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, I think that's a reasonable thing. I think I'd like to sort of see, like, what does this look like? And, to your point earlier, is that, recovery from these kinds of events doesn't take a couple days or a few weeks. It could take years. So thinking about this money in that kind of a context to ensure that if there are places that we have gaps or weaknesses, that we're addressing those and making sure that we're prepared if there's a 10th wave or whatever we're going to call it, of events, so that way we're not, kind of, okay, there's no more money coming, we've got to figure this out, and we have, expenses coming in left and right. So thinking about those kinds of things so that we're fully prepared for whatever may come to us in the future, I think is very important. So I do support the chair's suggestions, but I think I'd like to just sort of add that follow through.
Did you want to add anything?
A comment and a question. I mean, as I think about it, I see budget impacts, like the budgeting process for FY23 moving forward, the literal budgeting impacts, and then I see community priorities. And in my mind, I see those somewhat separate, and so I'm not sure if this is not to create more working groups, but I don't know how you tackle both of those, because on the one hand, when you're talking about priorities, you need a little bit of vision, you need a little bit of creativity, you need a little bit of a broader mind, but then when you're talking about budget impacts, you're quite literal down in the details. And so I don't actually see those two happening simultaneously in the same working group meeting. And so I don't know how you'll end up tackling that, but that would be one thing that I'd be looking for, is that little bit of a separation. So we're advancing ideas in terms of programs or initiatives or whatever it may be to address community priorities that are following a parallel track but not the same track as budget implications, even though they'll intersect. I don't know how you generate the list of priorities and initiatives at the same exact moment you're talking about the budget impact. But I leave that to you, Travis. I just express that as a comment more than anything else.
And because this is 3D chess, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, it is, right, exactly.
We've still got CARES funds at the end of the calendar year. So, so part of these conversations may be, is this better to be, budgeted through CARES, or is this something that is more long-term, and therefore we should be doing a carve-out from ARPA? So I'm happy to work with the town administrator and all of the stakeholders in multiple meetings to make sure that we do this right and intentionally. And unlike CARES, where they wanted the budget right away before they would give us the money, and then we had to start spending it, and there were real pressing needs, PPE, cleaning, that sort of thing, I agree with the chair's comment. We've got time to take our foot off the accelerator, breathe, be intentional, and, this is going to be part of your legacy for years to come of how it is that you apportioned the ARPA funds for our community to set us up for long-term recovery, individually as well as a community.
Judge, you were going to say something before?
I was going to say, from the budget perspective, right, I think it's going to be relatively, it's relatively simple to look at the ones that have long-term costs, right? If it's calling for staffing and those types of things, they fall into a separate category that has, long-term budget impacts. If they can be separated in terms of whether it's capital and those types of things that fall in the infrastructure, the water, sewer, broadband infrastructure, those are different. I think some of the, the items that'll come up from our local rapid response planning program for the economic development one, we have a few things that are lining up relatively well with ARPA's 4 categories. And so I think, I'm not overly concerned that some of them will be, will probably fall into the FY 22, 23, 24 budget cycle, but we will need to your point, separate the ones that will have longer term and make sure that those are tied to the budget, and that ARPA is understood to have a long timeline, but also a dedicated timeline.
Okay. Then my question is, what is the role then in this working group of the executive board here? And I raise that with the premium pay piece, because that's a tricky conversation, I would think, to have among working groups where you have the potential beneficiaries of that premium pay. And I don't mean that in any other way than to have a little neutrality there, a group of somebody perhaps from the board or some process by which the board can assist in making that decision on something like premium pay. And that's one of 4 categories. It's a significant portion of what.
If I could jump in, my instinct tells me that when that time comes, we should be talking with state and other officials in our peer group to find out, is our interpretation of who may be eligible the same as what they are saying. I'd hate to think that Holliston would define that premium pay for a group or individuals that we think would be eligible, only to find out later we're an island. Nobody thought that way. I'd like to see some consistency around the logic and the application of something like that. And that might go for the rest of ARPA too. You're going to start to quickly see communities kind of hone in, on similar strategies.
Right. We saw that with the rent and mortgage relief.
That's a great example, where I think we should be looking always for best practices and examples of creative use. But that's just my instinct tells me. When we get there, we don't want to be alone. We probably want to share.
But to your point, at the end of the day, the way the final rule is written, the role of the executive is to make the determination as to who fits in that category. And so it's the local chief municipal official that designates the following positions qualify for premium pay for eligible workers.
But if this working group were in play, doing the research to analyze other communities and standards and so forth, they make a recommendation to the board.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
I don't have any questions, Mike, on the rest of your presentation. Let's check with folks on Zoom. If they do, raise your hand, please. Identify yourself. Hearing none, Chief, it'll be a busy week for you.
I
Do you have
just
something else to add?
have two more quick slides.
Oh,
Chris, if you can bring those back up. No, I'm going to exploit my position in the chair right now. So, there we go. So, I do want to thank a lot of people. We went through a very different town meeting process last week. First of all, I want to thank Holliston Cable Access, their staff and volunteers for helping to assist with the technology and getting this out to the public for those who couldn't attend in person. On the town side, obviously, the town clerk and her staff, the facilities manager, the IT director and his staff, the public schools business manager, the director of technology and digital learning and his staff, the maintenance director and his staff, obviously the moderator who ran a very efficient meeting, but also at the same time allowed debate. And at the end of the day, thank you to the registered voters who showed up and participated.
You have those counts from each night? Not the same.
Yeah, I have 104 the second night.
Okay.
I've got the count in the spreadsheet on the first night. I can get that to you offline.
Thank you.
And then my very last slide, again, point of personal privilege. This is EMS week, and last week was Police Week. This is EMS Appreciation Week, and I do want to just say thank you to all of the personnel who work on our ambulance day after day, coming when people call 911, taking them to the hospital, giving them the care that they need, and being there for oftentimes the most vulnerable moment of someone's life when they call 911 for their adult. So thank you to my crews and my personnel who do this for our town.
On behalf of the board, second that. Thank you.
Now I'm done.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
We have a public hearing coming up at 7:45 then, so let's dive into warrants and we'll see how far we get.
Well, thankfully there's only one, so it shouldn't take so long.
Great.
All right, so I'm going to make a motion to approve the warrant in the amount of $1,615,614.25. Of that, $130,303.11 is town payroll. Motion to the second.
Second that?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries. Yeah. We'll start public comment then, anything?
Sure. Actually, I wanted to echo the chief's comments and say thank you very much to all the registered voters who came to 2 nights of town meeting to participate. Democracy is about people participating, and it's great to watch it in action, and getting people to get up and speak up when they're on issues that are important to them. And I wanted to also echo the chief's comments as well, and thanking all the individuals such as our technology director, our facilities manager, our town clerk, and particularly also a big thank you to Chief Cassidy for the work that you did to make this happen and to make it give us a third town meeting smoothly in a COVID environment is very impressive. So we're getting very good at it, and let's hope we don't have to do any more of these again. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Valentina.
I would just echo all of the thanks that have been given out, both to our police, EMS, of course, the work that they do on behalf of the residents of the town, and how they put themselves in harm's way to do that work sometimes. Very much appreciated, and as you said, Jen, everybody who participated on all levels, from all angles, at both nights of this town meeting. And to that end, I did get some feedback after town meeting, and I look forward to a conversation in the near future with Bill Mayer about ways in which we can promote more engagement at town meetings. Creative ideas, whether it be babysitters on site for parents who are bringing their children in. The lifting of these restrictions, I think, opens up that conversation. I believe the moderator was ready for it when he was elected, and then life turned, pretty much as I recall, after I was elected at the same time, on a dime. We found ourselves in a different place. I imagine he'll be excited to have that conversation. So I think that would be of value to our October town meeting.
The last week handheld clippers.
So I think that is absolutely something to support. John, I went through all 151 pages of this interim report on ARPA. I don't think but we can find other ways to talk about that.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it, thank you.
All right. My public comment, very briefly, share my colleagues' impression of town meeting. I thought it was a great town meeting, coupled with the content of what was voted upon. There was a fair amount of work product put into it. One oversight is our town administrator, who did a tremendous job pulling together his first annual town meeting. I'm not going to give you credit for last year's because you
Walked in on
First
that.
day.
that's right. He was
Literal first day.
riding the wave. But fine job, both on the omnibus and all the content. I thought the motions and everything went very smoothly, and it really puts the focus back where it belongs, which is the fulsome debate on content and public policy. So overall, very impressive. Ben, I wanted to thank you for pitch hitting on Friday, short notice, on behalf of the board at the annual police memorial service that was held at St. Mary's Cemetery. Holliston Police recognized fallen officers in a moment of silence in honor of Police Memorial Week. So thanks for participating in that. And as we stated earlier, look forward to future board discussion on the path out of COVID management. We clearly have introduced some issues tonight, which will have to come into play relative to the state of emergency and things that need to be done to effectively carry on work beyond June 15th, mindful that there may be some things beyond our control, i.e. state laws, but I think this board and its leadership needs to keep an eye on that. And we're on through your help, Chief, we hope to navigate that seamlessly. If you could just let Talman's office know we're all ears. If they hear anything on their level, that would be great. All right. Any comments on the public, from the public on public comments? Hearing none, we will move on to comments from the town administrator. You got about 2 minutes.
I do have some relatively lengthy ones. It would probably be better if we put it until after.
Okay.
Unless you want me to just start.
Why don't you start, bring up at least a couple. We'll make use of a couple minutes here.
Okay. The Senate Ways and Means released their state budget from the budget that we presented and was acted on as the omnibus budget at town meeting. The net change from the Senate was $152 from the previous level. So state budget still not set. Cherry sheet revenue, though, is pretty standard from the governor level to the House level to now the Senate level. We are not changing. I feel like we're on good standing of where that number is going to come in. A couple other items. I'll sort of follow up on town meeting in a slide I'll bring up. So let me cover some things that are outside of that purview. The Division of Local Services under Mass DOR has a group called the Technical Assistance Bureau. We had a conversation on that group as we were having discussions with the Governance Committee in the past few months. I did put in an application to the DLS tab unit, as they're referred to, and our engagement for them to come in and look at all aspects of Holliston town government is set to start in June. We have been assigned the team leader, and I will be reaching out to all of the groups that they'd like to meet with, and that will be happening in the next few weeks. So I'll probably actually couple that with quite a bit of outreach I'll be doing to a number of boards and committees that I will get into once we get into the update that I'll put up on the screen, but that'll take a little bit of time, and it is now 7:45.
Thank you, Travis. At this point, we have arrived at a hearing relative to the Class 2 Auto Lounge of New England, located at 86 Washington Street. I'll ask the clerk to open the hearing.
Certainly. Notice of hearing is hereby given that the Select Board will hold the public hearing on Monday, May 17th, 2021 at 7:45 p.m. in the Select Board meeting room here in Holliston. To consider the application James McManus III for a Class 2 motor dealer's license buying and selling of second-hand motor vehicles to be conducted on the premises known as 86 Washington Street, Holliston, Mass., Unit Number 1 and Unit Number 7, under the name Auto Lounge of New England, LLC. And there's more information on the town website.
We'll have a motion to open the hearing.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The hearing is now open. Good evening, Mr. Barberry. Are you going to speak on behalf of the applicant?
I am, as well as the applicant. Thank you.
Hi, Jamie McManus.
You're probably familiar with this property, 86 Washington Street. Mr. McManus bought the property a year or so ago. There's a first floor space when you're looking at the building to the far left. And then the unit also includes Unit 7, which is the entire basement of the building. The property has been used for a Class 2 used car operations since at least 2015. A representative at the time, Lou Bednarzik, who got approvals from the board under a Class 2 license to sell used cars there. That approval included the full basement and a lot more cars on the first floor. Mr. McManus, as I said, bought the property in May of last year. He is proposing to operate a used car business under the name Auto Lounge of New England LLC, which is a formed LLC, which he owns and operates. The proposal based upon the plan you've got is only to have 6 vehicles for display in the first floor area, and then 6 vehicles for display in the basement area. The rest of the basement is auto storage, but not cars for sale. And unlike the last license applicable to the property, we're not seeking any exterior spaces for sales of cars. So all the cars will be inside. We're talking hours 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Saturday. However, in all likelihood, the business will operate on an appointment basis only. So we'll let Mr. McManus give you a brief indication of his background in his operation.
Hi, my name is Jamie McManus. Can you see me?
We can hear you. We cannot see you, but that's quite all right if you'd like to
Sorry,
continue.
maybe having some technical difficulty. I bought the property a year ago, and we've been doing car storage there. And as Peter mentioned, seeking a Class 2 used car dealer's license. I think it's primarily for our clients. What we've tried to do is modernize the facility and create a unique storage experience for our clients, where rather than having to give quite a bit of notice to come and use their car, their collector car or a car that they're storing, they can really call us up anytime, and they have full access at any time to come in and get their car and then leave the car they came in the parking space that they're renting from us. So having the ability to have the license, as Lou previously had, I envision that it will allow us to support our clients in their endeavors to seek and find unique cars.
So very basic and less operations than previously approved.
Okay. Could I ask you a quick question before we go to board questions? What is on the property right now? Could you clarify that?
Just some auto storage.
Is it owned by Mr. McManus or is this a lease?
No, it's owned by me.
Okay, we'll go to
Yeah.
Peter. Yeah, Mr. McManus, are you ready for board questions at this point?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just have a quick technical question here. So Peter had mentioned that the hours of operation would be till 5 p.m., and yet the application here says 6 p.m. I just wanted to clarify which one is correct.
What was that?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Peter.
What was the question?
Peter, you said that the hours of operation would be till 5, the hours would go till 5 p.m., and yet the license application says 6 p.m. I'm just curious.
Oh, I'm
I just want
sorry.
to understand.
I was looking at an old email. So what's on the application is what we're requesting.
Okay. And so as I understand it too, that there's currently, it's just vehicle storage in this location. This was not previously used as a dealership and all?
No, it was previously a dealer by a guy by the name of Lou Bednarzik. And he had the whole
Okay.
basement authorized for auto sales. We're only seeking an area in the basement for 6 cars. So the rest of it would be just storage.
Okay, so the change, so it's basically we're changing it just to indicate that instead of the entire basement, it would be partially the basement. I'm just trying to understand what's changing for previous use of the space.
The exterior would be just parking for employees, no car sales exterior.
Okay, and it was for car sales previously?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was when I bought the business and the 2 condominiums, I thought that we could transfer the Class 2 license. And then as we looked into it further, of course, we had to come before you to seek a new license, and that's why we're here tonight.
Okay. Okay. All right, I was just trying to clarify what was actually changing from previous license. Okay, thank you. I'm good.
Thanks. Tina?
Okay, so I'm going to follow some of those clarifying questions. So you don't currently have a permit to operate as a Class 2 used car sales site facility?
No, because it did not transfer from Lou when we bought it.
Fair to say you have not been selling cars up until this point from the facility?
No, we have not.
Okay. You are asking for 8:30 to 5, Monday to Saturday, which is a change from the previous condition.
What was the
Yeah.
previous condition? I'm sorry.
It's a later hour.
The license is 8:30.
Yeah, so what I have in the board packet is the 2015 permit. I'm not trying to make an issue, I'm just trying to clarify.
Sure.
Your
Yeah.
hours of operation will be,
8:30 to 6 is what we envision, and by appointment. So again, it's intended to be for our clients, and most likely, I mean, it's the same way we found with the storage. It's through appointment and people coming in and contacting us ahead of time. So for the most part, that's been by appointment as well.
understood, okay. And again, no exterior parking spaces for stored vehicles that'll be sold, just for the employees coming in and out.
Correct. It's not necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You good?
I am.
Mr. McMahon, it's just a couple of questions for you. What kind of cars are you selling?
I think it really depends upon what our clients are looking for. As we have not sold any cars, we don't have anything as of yet.
Do you have an idea within your business plan, based on your client's interest? Are you marketing vintage cars?
I would say so.
sports cars?
I would say with working, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to talk over you.
Go right ahead. No, please go right ahead.
Working with Greg Pellegrino that owns Vintage Motorsports, the suites at the other end of the building, suite 5 and 6. We've been storing some of his clients' cars, so we seem to be working well together. But I envision it being special, either found at auction or through third parties. But it's just someone who shares the passion of collector cars. Doesn't have to necessarily be at a high price point.
Do you envision doing any kind of extensive car repairs or body work on site?
No, that would be
And
outsourced, and we do it through one of our partners, which we have on our website, which is Vintage Motorsports or European Motorsports or some other facility such as that.
Got it. And last question, regarding clients, how do you market or how do you receive clients? Is it all through the internet? Is it you said by appointment only. Can I walk in during regular business hours and say I want to buy your Corvette?
Sure, absolutely.
And a good reputation.
And I'll give
get
you a
his
good
phone
price.
number.
What's your phone number? I'll give you a good price. I have a ZR1 and I have a C8. So
See, that's all good stuff, but unfortunately, I don't have Peter Barberry kind of money, so that was all fake. It's not going to happen.
So you're a Prius driver too, aren't you?
Yeah, no.
well, I'd welcome all of you to come visit. We've really tried to reimagine car storage there, and it's been very well received by the clients that we've gained over the last year.
Excellent. Let's turn the questions over to any folks assembled on our Zoom call this evening to see if they have any questions regarding the Class 2 application of Auto Lounge of New England at 86 Washington Street. Any questions, please? Mr. McManus, if I were you, I would, in the future, try to find an attorney with a very low earned run average. The one you're working with, his earned run average went through the roof last night as he allowed 20 earned runs in a softball team. Never seen anything like it. Mr. Barberry?
Well, he's buying Corvettes, so it is
Peter, I don't
exciting.
know what happened to you last night, but whatever you had for dinner, don't do it next week. But in the meantime, I will appoint. Oh, we do have a question. All right. Who is that Cal? Sorry. Cal, do you have a question?
Yes, please, I do. Karen
Could you
Langton,
kindly just give us your name and address? Thank you.
Karen Langton, 100 Woodland Street.
Oh, hi, Karen. How are you? I didn't pick that up. Sorry.
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good. Go for it.
Yeah, I have two questions. One refers back to the hours of operation. The by appointment part is a little loose, and I'm hoping that we could put a little more constraint on that. As you know, the area is close to residences as well, and I think that that's awfully loose for people coming in and coming out. And I think that the town would probably appreciate having a little more continuity. And on that, we know that it's probably one of the biggest nuisance issues is noise, et cetera, in town. And the other question that I have is in regard to the storage of the cars. They sound like they're being stored inside. And I'm wondering that when the building was constructed, was there a system built to catch and separate any kind of leaking fluids that would come out of used cars? It's pretty typical that they need to be taken care of at some point. And then, you know, some cars just happen to leak fluids, and I'm thinking about that from an environmental standpoint.
I can actually answer, and you probably can too, Peter, both those questions. The intent of by appointment is not to have someone coming at 11 o'clock at night or some inappropriate hour. It's more so that if we're not open to the general public during the day, if someone wanted to come by, let's say 2 o'clock, we'd make sure we're there and we're ready for them to come in. And secondly, the entire property has an oil and gas separator system. So all the water and any oils coming off of any of the cars on the property goes into these holding tanks. And I happen to know this because the alarm went off. It gets pumped a couple times a year.
Yeah, the whole site was approved under site plan review back in 2014 or even before. And that included acknowledgement for storage of cars in the basement. So that was all approved at least 6 years ago.
Karen, any follow-up questions to those answers?
No, so it sounds like the by appointment is between regular operational hours. I'm just
Yeah.
still a little confused on that clarification.
It is. That's the intent.
Okay. So it would be by appointment within the, what was the hours that you stated? 8 to
8:30 to 6.
So if the license could say that, I think that would be fabulous. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from folks on the Zoom call? At this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve the license with any amendments that the board sees fit. Mr. Sproul?
I mean, I see that the hours of operation are Monday through Sunday. There's no provision in the license to discuss appointments. I don't know if this is necessarily.
Okay. Well, may I coach along the vote to suggest that the by appointment would be during normal business hours, as Mr. McManus indicated?
Right, but it's not. I'm just saying it's not.
Yep,
expressed in the license.
we'll clarify that in our vote.
All right, so I will make a motion to approve the Class 2 car dealer's license for the Auto Lounge of New England and James McManus III, operating at 86 Washington Street, Unit 1 and Unit Number 7 in Holliston. And the hours of operation will be Monday through Sunday, 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m., with any appointments to be within normal operating hours.
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Thank you, Mr. McManus. Welcome to Holliston. Peter,
Thank you.
We will move back to actually, we now need to take a motion to close the hearing. Mr. Sparrow.
I will make a motion to close the hearing for, the used car dealer license class T for the Auto Lounge of New England.
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That closes. I have 8 o'clock trucks. At this point, we'll move back to our agenda item relative to the comments from the town administrator. Travis, I think that's what we left off at.
Okay. Yes, one of those reasons I'll be reaching out to a number of groups is to coordinate the DLS tab unit coming in and looking for feedback from those groups. There are a number of items that came up through town meeting that will also lead me to be contacting quite a few people. And then previously our conversation on getting ahead of ARPA and putting together those sort of groups. All of these dovetail together. So the other two items that came out right around, actually the day after town meeting, so Wednesday, because we had 2 days of town meeting, we had a code of conduct. The town clerk sent that out to all boards and committees. The code of conduct seminar was put on by Maya and MMA. We are members of both. It was very well received. We've got a lot of positive feedback, so I'll look at whether or not sort of the product that they have makes sense for Holliston and go through town council on that and report back. But that had been sent out to all boards and committees that they had access to that as were clients of both MMA and Maya. The other thing that was during town meeting was a conversation on the email policy. So one of the things that we looked at, Chris Mayer, the IT director, the town clerk, and myself, 2018, the policy was adopted by the select board at the time. That was Jay Marsden, John Cronin, and Mark Aronian. That policy was put out in 2018. One of the things that at the time, I think the town administrator's office needs to be doing a little bit more follow-up on making sure that everybody got that information, had access to it, was following up on it. I think that what we can do right now, the policy has been provided to you all. I think it's still well written. I think it still stands up to the conversation that we had. One of the things we need to do is make sure everybody knows that they have access to town-owned emails if they're elected or appointed to these groups. And then once we have another public outreach, which will be coming shortly, that anybody new to any of those groups in the future, as they go through the town clerk's office, not only gets, by any chair or staff person of those board and committees to let them know about the email policy, but as they come to be sworn into the town clerk's office, they get hit on that end, so that everybody is very clear from the very beginning on how we do things with email, that they have access to it, and if they choose not to use it, that they need to understand how email works and public disclosure and those types of things. So that's another thing that a number of people on boards and committees will be hearing from me this week on. Followed up as well by a citizen's petition on the second night of town meeting that was to create a comprehensive long-range plan committee. That was passed and has 17 designees on it. So I have started the process today of looking at with staff. I think the way that we'll be doing it will be to say that the groups that are identified will assume the default designee is the chair of any of those groups that are identified, and then work with each and one of those groups to see if that's the right person. There are a couple that don't fall into the category of having a default group, which will lead to follow-up as well. But over probably the next month, assembling a 17-person group and the apparatus that will go with that is going to be challenging, but one of the other items that will be lead to much communication between many groups as the other items that I just mentioned. So between the code of conduct, positive feedback that people are looking for from these boards and committees that was well received by Maya and MMA, the email policy that needs to be redistributed with better follow-up from my office, the long-range plan committee, there will be quite a bit of outreach, and I will add ARPA to that list, and that will be ongoing, and I will report back.
Can I ask a question about the email policy?
Sure.
How far does that go? Like, who does it pertain to? I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about this board, but I'm talking about, say, like the governance committee or, some of these other committees that are appointed by this board, for example. How far-reaching does that policy go? As I read it, it seems a little ambiguous. It says, members of committees. It's not necessarily clear if it's anyone who's subject to open meeting, is it anyone who's doing town business? We have a bunch of those. I think there's like 37 on the town website. And I'm just curious, the golf course advisory committee.
So my understanding would be if they're listed on the website, that we would certainly offer it to them, right? So, the answer to that is, right, we have elected and appointed, but at the end of the day, if you're a board or committee of the town, you're being appointed most likely by an elected board as well.
Sure.
So, it is extending to that. I think, one of the comments that was made, was that, if anybody who's elected should have one. I think there are, one of the things is I thought the way it was written solved one issue. It may have created some other issues. I think this policy, the way it works, if better distributed again this time and sort of followed up on by all, included myself, IT director, the town clerk, so that we're staying on top of it. I think that the policy as written will work perfectly well, but there will be people who will opt out. They're not going to want to have another account. And the point of this policy is that we're not pushing it, but we just need to be communicating the benefits. And, I can certainly report back on the reasons that we receive for those who choose not to.
Is it something, that, like, that the individual people should, sign off that they've gotten the policy and they understand it? Is it something that if they opt out, they should find something? I think there needs to be, like, I don't have a problem with people opting out of it. It's at their discretion, but I'd like to see something that sort of says something official that says, if you want to opt out, you need to sign something that you understand what that means, that you're opting out of this process.
Like a checklist for a new appointed.
Yeah, and it's like something that's in the packet here. This is something that you should do. And if you're onboarding, if you're on board, you can. If you don't want to sign it, or you don't, or some sort of a thing that you're opting out, that they understand what that means to them. And if that's their decision, that's fine. But it could mean, what that could mean to their email, communication.
What you're describing sounds very, very particular to something pretty small, right? Like, are we nitpicking on emails? But no, what you're describing is the level of professionalism. It's in line with the Code of Conduct seminar as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I would actually, one of the things that I would love to see, and obviously it's beyond the scope of this particular thing, and I would throw it out there that I think we should even start talking about, like, how boards and committees interact with social media and things like that, and electronic communication from the website.
Yes.
That's something that
falls into the Code of Conduct.
Does it?
So the Code of Conduct, I think, and this is another one with following up with the town council. One of the things I think, based on the feedback that we got from people who really enjoyed the Code of Conduct seminar from Maya and MMA, is that a number of the items that people are interested in, whether they're new board or some people who've been long-standing always saying, I just don't understand why these things work this way, is that the other thing that we have through MTC, Meade, Tellerman, Costa, we use Jay, but we use all of their attorneys. We have access to counsel to come into our meetings. Sometimes they'll come and help with our meetings, as they did. I think they came in for our 5x5 meeting. Most recently, they've been very attending planning board meetings mostly, right? But it's relatively cyclical. That's within the contract. And the other thing that's within the contract is, I believe it's 2, but it might be 3 times a year that the council will put on seminars. They can do it for staff. They can do it for boards and committees. So one idea would be something to that effect, which is a general code of conduct. Come and ask any of those questions that you're mentioning, and have access directly to council. In an age of now Zoom and having sort of not perfected, but Chris has perfected it for us. We may be able to get more people to join in on things that have previously been tried and sort of not embraced. So I think we can certainly do any of those things. But again, all of that has to do with a number of these things that seem to be dovetailing at the same time. So I think I can certainly put that together. But I like the opt-out. I think that works.
Okay. I'm good.
Two comments on the policy. I'm wondering, under the second item, under general policy where it's outlined, something that's a sentence added that elected and appointed committee members are encouraged to use town email in communicating with staff. It's actually not in there, that it's a recommendation. How to do it is in here, but I didn't find any language that says it's a recommendation or it's advised that the public servant, the committee member, is communicating with staff and residents by email, by town email. If I was going to strengthen it at all, that would be the sentence that I would add. I agree with you, it's a good policy as written, but, and then board selection just needs to be changed to select board.
It does. That happened after 2018. Interesting. Yes, I will. I can incorporate those, and we can. I can put it on an agenda to sort of re-adopt it and do those things if we'd like to do that instead and make any of those changes. That's great. I'll do that for next week, and then we'll distribute. All right, so those things all were sort of in this frame of reference. I wanted to put one thing on for town meeting up on the screen. Although before I get to that, let me just also mention 2 people have been appointed to the EDC. The town administrator appoints to the Economic Development Committee. I would like to thank John Drohan and Dave Menapace for stepping forward to have appointments to the EDC. We are now at full capacity for the EDC, although my understanding is that as of June, we will be bumping back down as Peter Barbieri's term ends. And so we will actually be looking for another seat, but as of this particular moment in time, we are fully seated for the EDC, and that will change as early as June. And then I'll follow up on that as well, because obviously Peter has served that committee for a long time and should be thanked for his service. But first, I just wanted to mention John Drohan and Dave Menapace. Thank you very much for stepping forward for the EDC. They attended the EDC's May meeting and have received their appointment after that. And so with that, let me just do one thing. I just want to follow up. I think sometimes people ask me questions of sort of what took place or a summary of town meeting. So this is the way that I generally look at the finances of a town meeting, just so people understand how my mind works, which is to look at all the ones that have dollar bills next to them. And so with all of these categories, just, we'll be approaching these things a little bit differently, or excuse me, we'll be approaching these things as we switch into a new direction. We go through summer, and soon enough we'll be looking at the fall town meeting. But these are, where the funding sources were prior to town meeting, the activity that we had through town meeting, everything that was approved, and then ending balances that sort of lead us into the fall. So we are very close on levy capacity, which we all understood by looking at the way that the budget was situated. All of the articles down here for Blair Square Committee, 9 Green Street, the DPW facility were approved. A number of articles come from other funding sources, which is essentially does not need to be balanced. The capital expenditure fund increases and is in good position as we look towards October. That's going to be probably the main centerpiece of our October special town meeting. Our water balances are in good standing as well. The stabilization fund was not touched, but will be most likely in October. The new pension stabilization fund was set up with some seed money from this year. Again, we'll touch on that in October. And the CPC balance is after activity in the 3.6 range, so very healthy, and they have quite a bit on their future agendas. So any questions on that? Otherwise, again, I think it was already sort of stated and reiterated, but thank you to everybody involved in making this happen. It was good. I would have gone till midnight to do it in one night, but I understand why we split it in two. A couple groans as the moderator asked if anybody wanted to continue around 5 of 11. So other than 2 nights, I thought it was great, and thank you to everybody who made it happen. Any questions on the questions then for the town administrator?
Nope, straightforward. I like this.
Just to comment real quick, I think EDC Day is coming as a committee. I think with ARPA and then the Long Range Comprehensive Planning Committee, I think that they're going to, I hope they find themselves to be very productive and active in a good way for the community. And so I hope that also drives interest in that open seat that you mentioned for June. Again, I think that they've got some good momentum coming their way. And isn't it October annual town meeting now?
Focus of Article 10, it's now October annual town meeting. See if I can convince the LS tab of that, we'll see.
Okay.
It'll be our first test.
Yes, okay. Thank you, yes.
Any questions for the town administrator on the Zoom call this evening? Hearing none, let's move on to traffic discussions. I will turn to you, Mr. Hearn, to bring us through the Woodland Heavy Commercial Vehicle exclusion, the fact recommendations, all that public comment.
Okay, so what we have here on the agenda for the first item is the Woodland HCVE, the Heavy Commercial Vehicle Exclusion approval from Mass DOT. Just as a reminder to anybody listening, we also have a number of heavy commercial vehicle exclusion applications into Mass DOT for South Street and a number of other streets actually in the Woodland area. But we put in Woodland originally in November of 2020 after our August traffic forum on the Lowland Industrial Park. And that went through quite a bit of discussion back and forth between Mass DOT. Thank you very much to Senator Spilka and Rep. Dykeman's offices.
Just real quick, offered a big distinction of why Woodland came out before the others. They had a little bit of a head start. There was a distinct difference in their application.
So that application had been sort of looked at previous to the forum, right? It had been on our minds. We looked at it when we had Mass DOT out looking at it as well. It was buoyed by the safe routes to schools, by the rail trail crossing. Is there something else specifically you're looking at?
No, in terms of timing, like why did Woodland come out now versus the others? They all went in around the same time, but that's because Woodland had already been under consideration by MassDOT previously.
Right, we submitted that application.
For anybody listening, they're like, what about Bullard? What about Lowell?
Yeah,
That's fine.
we submitted Woodland we had data to submit Woodland. We submitted that in November. We then had the December 5th town meeting, which approved traffic engineering studies, which we then procured services from McMahon for. We got that data back, and now we've put in applications on all these other streets, the ones that you just listed, including South Street as well on the other end of town. So we had the data from another study that had been done, so we were able to put in the application on Woodland. We had to wait to get data on other streets, which is why they just recently went in.
Yep.
So very good point. All right, so the difficulty as I look at this, and we do still have Chief Stone on here, so the difficulty, I think, I'll use two examples which I've been using when people ask me questions on how this is going to work. Woodland Street has a number of businesses on it that require trucks to use the street for deliveries and other business. One of the drivers of truck traffic on Woodland Street is our school, right? So there are trucks that are going there to do business. Any truck that needs to access Woodland Street to do business is exempt from a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion. That's the law of how Mass DOT operates. Another example, which I think I'm very hopeful we'll move forward on based on the data that we received, is South Street. Now, South Street has a much more limited base of businesses that could justifiably say, no, we must use South Street to do business. It is almost entirely a cut-through, right? So from an enforceability standpoint, they're opposite ends of the spectrum. Woodland has businesses, including our school, that requires trucks to be on it. South Street has, one or two potentially. So from a signage standpoint now, looking at how a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion will be rolled out, signage can say essentially no trucks. There's a variety of things that are MUTCD approved signage for a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion. There's a qualifier that I've talked to Mass DOT about that is probably the most applicable to Woodland Street, and I'm just going to pull that up so people can kind of see, what we're really talking about here, which is the standard truck with a red arrow, with a red circle and a line through it, right? Very clear that trucks are not allowed. But then the sign underneath it qualifying it, which is accept local deliveries. And so on Woodland Street, I think that this is probably, the best way for us to handle this. It's based on all of the other MUTCD approved signs, the most clear for Woodland. Let me also just show one other sign as an example. I did not switch over, which means I need to stop sharing, then pick the other image. I apologize for the bouncing around. These are the other signs that you generally see in a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion to show trucks where to go. Where you're saying you cannot go this way, you then put the truck route sign so that they understand where they're going. And so those are the ones that I think we're going to be looking at most likely. I think the question that has already been sort of put forward, and I've seen a little bit of sort of back and forth on the areas, and I'm sure Chief Stone can get into it more if the board would like, which is going to be the placement of those signs, and the route that we have approved, which all of these applications into Mass DOT must give the alternate route to what we're excluding trucks from. So we say you cannot use Woodland Street. The alternate route is 16. we're trying to essentially say, unless you're doing a local delivery on Woodland, you cannot use Woodland Street to get around the lights on 16, essentially, is what we're going for. And so I think, again, that sign is the clearest example that I can to support the businesses that are there that must continue to do it. They don't want to confuse their trucks. Obviously, you can still use it if you need to make a local delivery. Otherwise, you're staying on 16. This is a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion approved by the Mass DOT. The other thing I'll just add before any questions is that we have the permit number, which I provided to you and provided to the town clerk. The traffic rules and orders have been updated and reference the permit number that we have from Mass DOT for the heavy commercial vehicle exclusion that was approved and announced on actually the second night of town meeting by the chair, because that was the date that we got that information.
Would it be appropriate at this point to have Chief Stone offer some insight as to how Holliston PD is prepared to start enforcement actions when these signs go up? That would be very appropriate. Chief, are you with us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Good evening, Chief. If you would be so kind as to shed some light on how Holliston PD is prepared to enforce these exclusions once the signage goes up, how residents can expect the experience to be, how you would guide residents in the event they see trucks using the road to handle it in terms of calls or anything like that. If you want to give us some insight, that would be helpful.
Sure. So I'll start with, I spoke with the town administrator last week and earlier today, and I asked the traffic safety unit at HPD to come up with a couple of recommendations on where they think signage should be placed and where they should be installed once we decide when that's going to go forward. I think a big part of that is because we're going to be the ones enforcing it. I think we have to have a say in where the signs go and where the advisories are, because if the advisories are in a location where you turn on to Woodland Street, so for example, High Street right now, one of the recommendations is to move that sign that's on High Street, because the warning for truckers is about 200 yards onto High Street. So what we want to do is most likely put the signs on Washington Street so that truckers know before they approach the Woodland Street intersection that a right-hand turn onto Woodland is not advisable and it's not permissible. If we put the sign at, say, Lowland and Woodland, well, the truck has already entered onto Woodland Street, therefore, defeating the purpose of being on the road itself. So I've advised the traffic safety unit. We have 3 or 4 pieces of equipment from Traffic Advisory Committee that we've purchased, the town has purchased. We're going to be using the signboards, the speed trailers, the counting devices. Our traffic safety officer, our traffic safety supervisor are going to be working on those, making sure that we have plenty of education before enforcement. And I think I mentioned this several weeks ago when we talked about it's going to take a period of education. I think that's the part that I think is most relevant to this conversation. This is not a fix-all. The police department supports the truck exclusion. We've worked with the town administrator. We've worked with the select board to get this approved. We're happy to see this happen. But this is not a cure-all. We can't just stick signs up and expect on Tuesday that there'll be no trucks on Woodland Street. This is going to be a concerted effort. It's going to take some time to educate. Essentially, we're changing behaviors of truck drivers that have used this route for years and years and years. And so we ask for a little bit of patience and a little bit of understanding as we kind of traverse this new area. Now, this is just Woodland Street. We have applications, as you know, on 6 or 7 other streets in town that are going to require just as much attention as Woodland Street. So I think education and moving into an enforcement arm after that would be, in my recommendation, the best move forward.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. Any questions on that?
Yeah. I think just a little bit of, if somebody could speak to just a little bit, obviously education for the businesses as well. I mean, obviously, making sure the truckers can come in, because I know sometimes third parties are involved in trucking. Are we, is there particular outreach to the businesses that are on Lowland Street to make sure that they know that these are going to be the new rules, and they're going to make sure that they use the right way to get to Washington Street and to with their final destinations?
So part of the job description.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Part of the job description for the traffic safety officer was as much enforcement as it was education. So to have Officer Grace go out to the businesses, say, listen, this is when this takes effect. These are the new guidelines. As much as we want to enforce this and we want to make sure that the rules are being followed, we also want to educate drivers. We're not looking, to write big money fines. We're not looking to put drivers out of service and so forth. We want to educate, and like I said earlier, change behavior. So part of Officer Grace and the traffic safety unit is to get out there and speak with those businesses, speak with those, speak with the schools, speak with the delivery times and so forth, so that we can, again, change behavior of the drivers.
You good?
Chief Stone, I have two questions for you, but if you could just hold, I have a quick question for Travis. After the Lowland Industrial Park Forum back last August, you contacted DOT to confirm routes that have these no trucks signs already on them. I remember you contacting them about High and Locust. We heard from a resident today about the fact that there's a no truck sign on Locust. Locust is not currently under a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion, right? If I remember correctly, that was the case.
I think it was a paper exclusion. I don't believe it ever had mass.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you look at the traffic rules and orders, there are a couple on there that don't list a permit number.
Okay.
Permit number is what you get from Mass DOT, and if it doesn't, then it's not. I think, Chief, I saw something, and you can speak to Locust, I think, directly. We did include High in our data count. What they did confirm, what Mass DOT did confirm when they were out on our walk, is that the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. on part of Lowland was properly gone through the process.
Thank you for that. All right, then I'm going to turn back to you, Chief Stone, and just ask, I know the Traffic Advisory Committee had raised the plan for a sign audit to be conducted where DPW primarily will identify signage that's significantly old or out of place or whatever. Given that a truck exclusion is not enforceable without a permit number, and given the focus on education and wanting to be really clear in that education, is it worth having those routes, those roads that have no trucks, whatever that sign is that was referenced on Locust Street, come down? Because it creates confusion where you have, what driver knows that there's a permit number behind this sign and not a permit number behind that sign? So my question is it worth removing signs, making sure that as a part of this particular education effort, we're taking down truck exclusion signs that don't come with a permit number? Does that make education and enforcement better?
So I'm just trying to think, I'm trying to relate it to, so for example, like Bullard Street, I know that's next on the agenda. Bullard Street, somebody put a sign up 30 miles an hour. We know that's unenforceable. My recommendation was any sign that's placed, removed, installed going forward, that it basically has teeth behind it. So if we're going to put a sign up and there's no right-hand turn, or there's no truck exclusion, or there's a weight limit, those signs, I strongly advise, I say this as the Traffic Advisory Committee Chairman and as the police chief, if there's no enforcement behind it, I don't recommend those signage. I think advisory signs are important in some locations, but advisory signs after time and after those don't get obeyed for a certain amount of time, they become useless, in my opinion. So I think any sign that's up there now, including a weight restriction or heavy commercial vehicle exclusion, I think we can include that as part of the sign audit. I don't know that we could take them down now. I think High Street actually does have teeth behind it. I don't think Locust does right now. I know Locust is part of the current DOT, right. Due to be approved. But I think this came up on South Street. It came up on the Bullard Street discussions at our TAC meetings. I think any sign, I think we should be cautious when we do put the signs up, like I said, that there has teeth behind it to enforce what's being relayed on the sign. That way it relieves the confusion. It leaves the motorist knowing exactly, if I do this, then this is going to happen. If I don't do this, then this is going to happen.
I mean, I know that Officer Grace is not looking for more work, but in the context of education of the driver being really key to some of these changes, I think that's feedback we need to get from Officer Grace, is if he feels like there's signage out there that doesn't have, as you say, teeth, and as I would say, the permit number in terms of truck exclusions behind it, we need to know that, and those signs need to be addressed. I hear what you're saying about Locust Street right now. It is pending an approval. So let's not address that one right now while we're waiting. But there are going to be other signs in town that are not with the necessary teeth behind them. So if Officer Grace could provide that feedback, that would be good. The second thing that I wanted to ask you about is success metrics. When it comes to enforcement and education, is there some, I think it will boost the confidence in these neighborhoods that have been waiting and waiting and waiting for these changes to know that we will at a later date assess the success of the enforcement and education. Have you identified any success metrics that you would use 3 months, 6 months down the road to say we're having the effect that we wanted to have through both education and enforcement?
Sure. So I think, I think this comes up a lot with different metrics and evaluating if we're asking for this program, is it worth it? Are we deploying our resources in a efficient way? Is it effective? The short answer is in 3 months, we could run numbers, say, today's May 17th, we run the numbers on August 17th, and let's compare those. The unknown variable, however, is personnel on the road and staffing levels and patrol levels. And I'll just go back to where, my budget proposal for FY21. I can only dedicate traffic for us is part of a overall initiative. Obviously, it's one of the 5 major components identified in our strategic plan. However, patrol in response to calls is our number 1 priority, being out in the neighborhoods. So just like our school resource officers, our court prosecutor, our traffic safety officer, these are all initiatives that we've taken and we dedicate a tremendous amount of time and resources to. However, on any given weekend or any given day, in order to sustain the proper staffing levels, those aren't fulfilled all times, all days of every week. So I think a short answer is yes, in 3 months we could reevaluate, in 6 months we could reevaluate. I would also put in there that there's the unknown of what the call volume was and what the types of calls we've responded to. Just for an example, we have currently over 50 TAC requests that we are assessing and going through. We answer 1,300 calls per month, which averages about 43 calls per day for our police department. Not including traffic, not including selective enforcement, not including traffic stops. But yes, it's a long answer to a short question. I think we could look at it. I think it would be beneficial to look at the 3 month, maybe 6 month, 9 month, 12 month, and see where we've improved, where we could allocate more resources. But I certainly think reviewing where we are and what we are continuing to do would give the residents and give the community confidence that we're out there selectively enforcing and educating traffic.
Well, Chief, my last comment here is I really like the idea of a 3 month look back for 2 reasons. Number one is if the numbers aren't looking great, I think that in part serves your request for town meeting, as this board talked about when we went through the budget cycle, to revisit that request for an additional officer at October town meeting. So I think that supports it one way or the other. If it's because of those unknown variables where you can't have a patrolman out there, an officer out there, or more enforcement is needed. In either of those 2 events, a 3 month look back is going to probably give us very good information as we head to prepare for October town meeting and revisit that request that was in your budget. So for a whole bunch of reasons, I really like the idea of a 3 month look back in terms of success with enforcement and education.
Okay, great.
Are there any questions at this point regarding the Woodland Heavy Commercial Vehicle Exclusion discussion?
I have a question.
Hey, Karen, how are you? Go ahead.
I'm fine, thank you. Karen Langton, 100 Woodland Street. So what I'm hearing, right, is that the resources are just so pulled tight in this area, which is so concerning for our police and, and the things that they have to do in town. And education and enforcement will be vital, right? Because people just need to change their behavior, and that's not an easy thing for people to do, usually without incentivizing it in some way. So I'm wondering, when we first started having this discussion, I have a couple of questions. One would be, there was discussion around a letter going to the businesses in the industrial park area, just informing them so they can be proactive and be educating the drivers that do come with frequency. In that way, right, that would be a behavioral address to individuals, which is typically a positive way of having that discussion. And secondly, I'm wondering if the town has given consideration to cameras. Rhode Island uses them. They use them in school zones. They use them at traffic lights, and they are not still shots, they are video. And it's pretty hard to contest when you see somebody rolling through a red light. It's just evidence. And I'm wondering if we have considered that. I'm thinking at the corner of Woodland, as the chief said, if it were, what did he say, 200 feet before you get to the intersection, but now as the person is sitting at the traffic light, if they missed that first sign for whatever reason, and we don't have another sign at that traffic light, and then they take a right, you know, we're reacting, I suppose, rather than proacting is, I guess, where I'm trying to go with that.
Chief, if you'd like, you can take a stab at Karen's question, but I think it also speaks to Mrs. Farrell's point earlier that we ought to reach out to some of the commercial business owners in the park to alert them about these changes and work with them proactively.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As part of the two arms of police chief and traffic advisory committee chairman, we looked at early on at traffic advisory committee of what we could use as equipment and tools to do exactly what we're trying to do, right? So it's for us to hear citizen petitions and to move forward with these. There's not a whole lot we can do without the equipment. Part of the equipment that we got was signboards and messaging boards, and that's what we have currently housed at the police station. I've instructed like I said earlier, our traffic advisory, our traffic safety officer, our traffic safety supervisor. I said, review the manual, go through it. We have the contact person from All Traffic Solutions. Bob Keynes is available to us anytime. Learn how to deploy these and in an education forum and get these things deployed so that we can teach the public, teach the drivers how to change their behavior. I think Ms. Langdon hit that nail on the head. When it's going to take time, and it's going to be reaching out to the businesses, to Lowland Street. I have the letters that we talked about probably about a year ago that we put on hold, sending out to all the businesses in Lowland Street. We have all the business addresses. Now that we have the Mass DOT approval, I have those sitting on my desk at work with all the addresses printed out. We can send those letters out. We can do face-to-face talk with them and tell them, listen, we know you've always had deliveries come in from this entrance and this exit, but going forward, here are the new regulations. And if you violate these regulations, these are the penalties you'll be subject to. So I think, with social media outreach, with our signboards, with our officers going door to door, I think we can educate. And certainly there'll be violators, and certainly we'll write tickets and write money fines. But I think it'll be a concerted effort on a number of phases.
Thank you, Chief. Karen, any other follow-up to that?
When do you think that this will begin? You said that you have to order signs. I'm wondering, from the time that you order signs, when do you think that they would actually make it to Holliston? When do you think that they would be when would they be put into place? And then from there, when would you be starting your education process?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll take that if you like. The town administrator and I went back and forth last week, and we discussed this morning. I got two recommendations from our traffic safety officer, our traffic safety supervisor, on their recommendations on sign placement. It's probably by the end of the week, if not early next week. The town administrator and I will be sitting down with the DPW director, talking about sign placement, how to order them. Sean Reese of the DPW has the manual. He can order these signs, the one that Travis put up earlier. Just a matter of deciding which signs we want, where we want them placed, and installing them. And from that point forward, I think it's, the education portion of it can begin anytime. I think, as I said, I instructed our officers to learn the ins and outs of the equipment that we have. Going door to door, we have the letters that can be sent out, at the board's approval. We could send them out as early as tomorrow, saying, listen, these are the new regulations and so forth. So I think it kind of already has begun. And I go back to, it's going to be a process that will take a little bit of time. But I feel confident that we've taken several steps to address this issue already, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you, Matt. Travis, the question came up about sign ordering. If Sean were to place a sign tomorrow, is there any kind of supply stream delay, or can he expect them within days or weeks?
I don't know the turnaround time on the, the ones that we order that are standard are very quick turnaround time within a week, right? But so, these are less standard, so I'll get a time frame on him. And he's prepared. Again, I wanted to make sure that you saw these signs, we're comfortable with them, because, once we order them, there's no returns. But that was sort of I'll have a call with him tomorrow. We can talk to Permasign, who we use.
So Karen, the takeaway I have here is that the signage is probably conservatively a couple weeks away, but enforcement in terms of administration and education is underway now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Are there any other questions on the Zoom call this evening relative to the commercial vehicle exclusion on Woodland Street? Hearing none. Oh.
John, just a comment. So I thought I heard Chief Stone saying he would be looking for a vote to send out the letters. Is that something you'd like to consider? Or is that necessary?
That was not part of our agenda this evening.
Okay.
Is there something that you're recommending here, Mr. Hahn?
So the one thing, if we're comfortable with those signs, we can initiate that. The funding for that, which we'll actually discuss also under B of our number 7 on our agenda, it only complicates it slightly. I think it's not going to stop us from moving forward at the moment. When it relates to the letter, you'll remember that a letter had been prepared by PD previously that did not go out. I think we can certainly work on that now with a final product and sort of the final directive for Mass DOT, rework that letter and get it out. I'm comfortable with the way that the chief had sort of done the background on that to begin with. I think we can just update it now to have a little bit more backing with the DOT approval. And if that's what the board would like.
I think it's a future action, so if you could be so kind as to bring it forward to the next meeting or two.
Okay.
Stick it in one of those agendas, okay? All right, let's just move on to the TAC recommendations on Bullitt Street and Mellon Street. Turn to you again, Travis.
So this actually, between the chief and the vice chair, as members of TAC, and also Chief Cassidy in the room, who's a esteemed member as well, there were a couple previous votes that the process is for TAC to make recommendations to the select board to then take votes on. And they have a few that needed to be put on the agenda for approval before we can move forward. So I would assume the vice chair.
Sure. So I'm taking it you did not hear back from Drew Horton, the clerk, that he's obviously not on the call. Okay, so the Traffic Advisory Committee made 3 recommendations to the Select Board. They're here tonight because each one carries an appropriation, or an authorization, rather, of appropriated funds. I'm just scrolling down to find them. We've discussed already the one for the Woodland Street heavy commercial vehicle exclusion, and then the other 2 are Bullard Street, which is a 25-mile-an-hour sign, replacing a 30-mile-an-hour sign. You have at the board packet the vote and the date. And then, I'm sorry, there is a third. The Mellon Street signage is to add and move signage. That was the vote and date are there. And then South Street, although it's actually on Washington Street. So there was a hearing for multiple South Street residents, and what came out of that with Mass DOT input was to add signage onto Washington Street that says designated truck route this way, with an arrow pointing this way down Washington Street to 495. That was DOT's recommendation back to the Traffic Advisory Committee. This was in response to concerns that residents had with trucks turning left off of Washington onto South Street. This serves a double benefit now that we have the application into the heavy commercial for the HCDE, because assuming we are granted that and we have a permit number in place, the sign only serves that benefit. So it's a green sign that, again, directs trucks to remain on Washington Street as they head down to 495.
My
So-
understanding
Mr. Chairman.
on that side is that Mass DOT will provide that. Actually, maybe that's what
That's right.
is mentioning.
Good, Chief.
Sorry, not to interrupt, the town administrator hit that nail on the head. My lieutenant's working on that now. I believe it's Lori from Mass DOT. Those signs have, to my knowledge, have already been fabricated. If they haven't already been delivered, I would be surprised. The only stipulation was that Mass DOT would install them on the Holliston end, because Route 16 is a state highway. Just as long as we had conversation with Medway, they'll provide them free of cost to Medway, but they're not going to install them on the Medway end because Clark Street is not considered a state highway. They're going to have to work with Midway administration to find out where on 109 those are going to go. So that was the only stipulation that Lori from Mass DOT, they'll take care of the Holliston end. They just want to have some contact with Medway to ensure that Medway will install their end.
So the funding source for that third recommendation is Mass DOT. So then the select board is looking at approving funding for Mellon Street and Bullard Street.
Well, we would take a vote on the South Street too, just because obviously the select board is, you are the highway surveyors. But we won't have to pay for it.
Who has the data? Do you have the data for this motion, or do you want to, could you make the motion on these, Tina?
Yes, but the question for the town administrator first, did you want to provide the pricing or no? I thought I saw some chatter today on that. No?
No.
I don't have them in front of me. Do
No,
you?
okay, no, I do not.
Not necessary.
Not necessary. All right, so I'll make a motion to approve the addition of and moving of a sign on Mellon Street per the TAC recommendation.
What is that? What is that?
Mellon Street is not a through street. The sign is, that the new sign says not a through street where there is not currently a sign, and the moving is to move a sign that says exactly that to a location where the drivers on Winter Street can see it. So we're adding one, moving another, but it's the adding part that has the cost, which is why we're looking at it tonight.
Do you have a motion? Do you have a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries.
The second would be for Bullard Street. Here, we had a 4-2 vote on February 24th with the recommendation to remove a 30-mile-an-hour sign and replace it with a 25-mile-an-hour sign, following the decision that the Select Board made to institute 25 miles an hour on all non-posted roads.
Okay, so to that one, so 17C was what was adopted by the select board, I believe, either at the end of last week or today. The sign has been removed from Bullard. And so the idea is, without that sign had been posted, let's say erroneously, but I confirm with Mass DOT that sign did not belong there. The street had never actually adopted, was it 35 or 30?
30.
So it had never gone through Mass DOT. So this is another thing of like the paper changes that have been made over time.
Right.
That was never actually approved. When I go through Mass DOT, they say, yeah, the sign doesn't belong there. You remove the sign under 17C, Bullard is now 25 miles per hour. The conversation that TAC had was, we just remove the sign, or do we add a sign at 25? And that's the question here. So removing it makes it 25. Putting up the sign of 25 is the vote that they took, which would then, we would purchase, I think we may actually have one of 25 miles per hour as we put up on Bullard.
Okay. The motion, do you have a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries. Any other ones, or is that it?
So then we have a motion for South Street signage, which is actually to install designated truck route with an arrow pointing along Washington Street towards 495. Per the town administrator, that needs a board approval to go on the traffic rules and regulations. So that is the motion.
So this motion is a preliminary action. Obviously, if they get the exclusion, it goes away, correct?
No, so what this is signage that Mass DOT is essentially acknowledging will go up, and because it's on state number route, they'll put it up for us. I'm just saying to have the select board vote that they want this because you are the highway surveyors. But there is no cost to the town. Mass DOT is fabricating them and installing them and working with.
Where exactly will it go?
Do you know where Weston Pond is?
Yes.
And then you've got Cortland on your right and South on your left.
Yeah.
Just before that, as you're passing Weston Pond and the soccer field,
Got it.
it'll be there.
All right, we have a motion for the South Street signage.
I'll second it with the comment that, Mass DOT is consulting.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries. You good, Tim?
I am, yes.
Could I make a request, vis-a-vis these, in the future? Could we get some reporting on, like, what's been done, what's been spent, you know, and sort of like a recap of TAC activity? You know, I heard the police chief say that there's like 15 in the queue. I'd really like to know a little bit more, about what's going on, with the TAC.
We meet on Wednesday. We have a 7 p.m. meeting Wednesday night, and it is on the agenda to talk about how to update the information and so that we have a report that we can share. So, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment this evening relative to these traffic discussions? Hearing none, we will move to board business. Meeting minutes of April 20th and 26th, Mr. Sparrow.
Sure. I will make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of April 20th, 2021, and April 26th, 2021.
I have a motion of a second.
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Thank you. We have a contract for Clearwater Recovery Wastewater Treatment Plant. You have something to express on that, Mr. Hearn?
I'll just add a little clarity here, and so I apologize I didn't send the motions in advance, but you're just essentially making a motion to approve this contract. I think we went through the budget process. We lost the contractor of the wastewater treatment plant. They said essentially they were not making enough money on us. The facilities manager went out, did an RFP, got feedback from a number of companies. We then actually adjusted the budget based on that feedback for FY22,
And they're back.
which was approved last week. This is actually a different company. They all sound exactly the same.
Okay, all right.
This is a new company, Clearwater Recovery, James Keith did an excellent job making sure that we get the best deal, and they will be taking over the facility there, maintaining it, and we will. I'll report back on how that's going, but I think it's going to be a nice change, and we'll see. We'll get some feedback from them on on any optimization that they think could be done at that facility.
Travis, at this point, it might be appropriate for me to just weigh in and just add, if you could have a recommendation made to this board, for either Travis and or Clearwater, about ways to optimize that plant going forward. I know it's underutilized, it has capacity, any kind of creative, scale approach, I think the board should be informed about, okay?
Yep, and I think actually
A lot of chatter out there about ways to do it, but I'd like to hear from the professionals.
I think the vice chair mentioned earlier, it actually lines up any potential improvements to that facility may line up relatively well with the way ARPA is written. So,
There you go. Do we need a vote on that?
yes, we do need to vote that contract.
You have something there, Ben, or would you?
I do have one question. Is this an annual contract?
It is an annual contract. So you just be voting the annual contract for Clearwater Recovery for the wastewater treatment plant.
All right, I will make a motion to approve the contract for wastewater treatment at 100 Linden Street for Clearwater Recovery.
I will second that with a quick question. That is within the budget for professional services for the wastewater treatment?
Yes, we
Okay.
also we have professional services does the majority of it. We have some supplies and services that they can do for chemicals, and then we also have a maintenance line. So if they run into issues, we sometimes have to contract out others to do that work, or we can pay them above that contract level for fixes to the facility.
Great, okay, thank you.
So to your point, the contract is $3,380 per month for maintenance, $1,240 per month for field testing of effluent, $1,002 per hour for corrective actions by the contractor, and after-hour emergency service calls with a 2-hour minimum labor is $204 per activity. Having said all that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That carries. On to Emt Appointments. I believe we have 3 this evening. Is that correct, Chief? Do you have them in front of you, Ben?
I do.
Motion
Do you want me to do all three, or do you want me to do one at a time?
All three sign.
Can I just preface this by saying one thing that had been requested to sort of see a balancing of seeing how many EMTs we have on the rolls. I provided the schedule through the chief in your packet, so you can sort of see where these individuals will fit in. Additionally, some EMTs who had been on the rolls previously but were no longer active have been removed. I believe there were 9 of those. So certainly, you know, from a balancing standpoint of who we see as a head count when it comes to our OPEB liability and those things, this is balanced out by that work, excellent work by the chief, which I appreciate, and I just like to have that as context for these appointments.
Okay. I will make a motion to appoint the following EMTs for the Holliston Fire Department. Tyler Chapman of Marlboro as an on-call EMT. Stephan DeMeo as a seasonal EMT. And Matthew Mancini of Medway as a seasonal EMT.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. That's carried. And busy night for the clerk.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
We have a rail trail road race, easy for me to say.
Yeah. We have 3 times fast.
We'll go with that then.
Sure. I will make a motion to approve an event permit to the Friends of Holliston Trails for the Friends of Holliston Trails virtual trail run, which is to take place on Saturday, May 22nd, 2021.
All right, have a motion to have a second.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Carries. And another one.
I will make a motion to approve an event permit for Ernie's Run Tournament, the softball tournament to be held on Saturday, June 19th, 2021 at Campersall Field.
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Other business. Cheryl.
I have no other.
Ms. Hunter.
No, it's a good thing.
Just a couple of items, reminding folks, May 25th is the town election. We have a few things trending for next Monday night, which will be the last meeting of this cycle of the select board. Mr. Sparrow was kind enough to assemble some year in review or quarters in review, as you would call it. We'll look forward to seeing those as we conclude our year of service and discuss a little bit about the view ahead. We have a couple of very fascinating hires queued for early in FY22, including the assistant town administrator and DPW deputy director. A lot of exciting things coming up. So, folks, at this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Actually, before we do, let me just ask the Zoom call if they have any other comments before we close out for this evening. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I will make that motion.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That's carried. Good night, Holliston. Thank you.